Okay, guys, good afternoon. Thanks again for being here and hanging in there through the semester. We do have like 3 minutes, so just waiting until 2:30, and then we'll get things started right off. Hope you guys had a nice weekend. Maybe somebody got to check out the Oscars. Hi, Tina, how's it going? I was a little surprised that Chadwick Boseman did not win the Best Actor. I mean, Anthony Hopkins is a great actor too, but I thought we were going to give it up for, his body of work since he just passed away. But anyway, yeah, lots of stuff going on. Hi, Kevin, Nicholas, Maria, Mia. Good to see you guys. Alicia, welcome back. Hey, Spencer. Hey there, Jasmine, Angelina, Emily, welcome back. Just got about another minute here until we get started. Hey, Daniel. What? Hey, Alan, Ruby. Nice to be with you guys. Okay, everybody, it's now pretty much 2:30, so let's just get this underway. Welcome back, all you guys, and hopefully you had a great weekend. Today we're just continuing through our lecture series, and we're going to try to catch up a little bit. I'll talk to you about the article by Daniel Stoljar to learn something about physicalism, which is a branch of monism, and that'll obviously serve as like a kind of counterweight to the argument for dualism that we all studied last week. So we're in the philosophy of mind. We have a couple more meetings on this topic before we transition into the last topic of the semester, which will be all about life, the value of life, and the question of what's the right attitude to take towards death. Okay, and thanks guys for saying hello. Make sure to leave some type of comment anytime you want to just keep your attendance record on track. And as you do know, also, you have a paper, but it's not due yet. It's not due for a little while. That will be due in 2 weeks, so Monday, May 10. And you still have, that means 14 days at least to work on it. Well, 14 days at most to work on it, I should say. Anybody who's looking to get any type of commentary from me or any kind of comments on a draft, feel free to let me know through an email. And if you send me something with enough time left, I can help you with that a little. But I know there's still plenty of time to go, so that probably might not be on your radar just yet. But letting you know just as a reminder that I'm here to help if you need it. Okay, so we'll jump right back into the meeting. I want to review a little bit, just briefly, the argument from Descartes, and then we'll push forward from there with the next author in the list. Here's a funny thing that happened to me this week, and you want to hear this? So my car got broken into. Damn, first time that's happened, but yeah, like where it was parked, somebody bashed in the back driver's side window, and because of that, they were able to get in. They took an item. They took a nice guitar, so it's kind of sad. This is like a Fender Telecaster, $1,500 guitar in a hard shell case. So I think that's why they wanted to break in, because they could see that it was in the case in the backs. So anyway, yeah, kind of sad. But I do have insurance. I have like homeowners insurance and auto insurance. So I've already got it all kind of squared away with the insurer. They're sending me a check for like $1,350, which is almost the full value of the guitar. So there's a little deductible, so they couldn't refund the total amount. But I'm not taking the hugest loss. I guess I'll get this check in the next few days in the mail. And then in terms of the window, I have to go and take the car right after this class to the automotive BMW place where I get the car fixed. This happened last night, so I just had to react to it today. I got a call from my neighbor, and he was going to where he's parked, and he saw my car with the window broken, and he called me. He's like, "Hey, come down to the underground parking garage. Looks like someone broke into your car somehow." I came down and saw it, filed a police report. So anyway, a little bit of a hassle. These things do happen. Guess word to the wise: if you have something valuable, maybe put it in your home. I just thought, whatever, you could leave it in the car overnight. But I guess that was the lesson that I learned. But not to worry. Just letting you guys know what I've been dealing with over that last little couple of days. But it's not a big thing. Anyway, though, welcome back, guys, and let's get back to the philosophy. Yeah, it's, I don't want to make it sound like it's a worse thing. Really just a window, so that's going to be a repair, and then the guitar that they took. But with insurance, thankfully, I'm actually really happy that I finally was able to use my renter's insurance, because I've been paying into the policy for years, never had any issues. So now finally something was stolen, I guess. Nice to have the insurance. Anyway, though, let's go on. I'm just going to quickly tell you guys a little bit about the review of the last meeting, okay, just to keep that fresh in your mind. So we've been now talking about this topic of the philosophy of mind in the last few meetings. Philosophy of mind is the part of philosophy that investigates the concept of consciousness. So what is consciousness but the ability to see, feel, perceive, experience anything, have thoughts, memories, hopes, fears, pains, pleasures. So if you're a conscious being, not like this marker, but like me or you, then you're interested in consciousness. Philosophers are interested in pretty much everything that has anything interesting to it. So this is another topic of interest. It's philosophy of mind. Now, within the philosophy of mind, some big questions exist. Like, is the mind just the brain? Or is there a difference between the physical brain and what people call your mind or your consciousness? Could your consciousness survive without the body anymore, like when you die? Or is that impossible? Could a machine ever think? Is consciousness just a physical process, or is it something that's more spiritual? Is there like a soul rather than the brain, or are they related to each other, or what? Now, there's two very major positions or schools of thought within the philosophy of mind. You have monism and dualism. So for monism, that's the way of thinking that everything in the universe is just made out of one kind of substance, just one. And dualism says that everything in the universe is made out of two kinds of substances. Now, when these monist and dualist views are being debated, the substances that are being referred to here are physical matter or mind. Physical matter is just anything that is extended in space, and like the smallest unit of that would often be referred to as the atom. Okay. On the other hand, mind is considered to be something that lacks extension in space. It has no extension, no size, shape, mass. So it's not physical. It's not in space in terms of having that kind of mass. But it's consciousness and it's thinking. So think of like a soul, something that's just immaterial, not like a little cube or a little pebble, but just a soul, like a disembodied thing, which has thought and consciousness. Now, to the monists, there's two types of monism. There's physicalism, which says everything's made out of matter, even consciousness and thought is made out of the brain and made out of the physical and electrochemical signals that the brain has. So physicalism says it's all physical, even consciousness is. Idealism says everything's an idea. That's another kind of monism, but really we're not most focused on that. We're focused on physicalism versus dualism. Now, what's dualism again? It says there's two substances that make everything in the universe. And in the dualist way of looking at it, there's both physical matter and also mind. They're not the same, but they both exist. So physical matter is, like we said, anything that's extended in space, built out of little particles of matter, like atoms. But mind, according to the definition provided, is something that does not have extension in space and is thinking. So if you're a dualist, you think there's both. There's physical matter, but there's also consciousness, which is not anything physical. The body you have is a physical object. Even the brain you have is physical because it is, of course, extended in space. Right there it is in your skull. But to a dualist, there's more to consciousness than just the existence of all these physical parts in the brain. There's also the soul, the mind, whatever you call it, and that's something that's not physical. Okay, so arguments on either side. We started with the Cartesian argument for dualism, René Descartes and his argument. So I'm just going to quickly run through all the major points of that argument. Last time, it takes a whole class to really go through it in very clear detail. So this is obviously going to be a little bit more compressed, but just as a reminder or a refresher. So with Descartes, he wrote the Meditations back in 1641. This was a book where he's trying to find out what is certain. And in that book, he says, use the method of doubt to determine what's certain. The method of doubt says to assume to be false anything that could be doubted. So the argument begins by saying that with the method of doubt, everything you perceive with your five senses could be doubted, and even math and logic, because maybe you could be dreaming or deceived, right? But there's one thing that you cannot doubt. So the second premise says that the one thing, though, you cannot doubt is that your mind exists because you are thinking. So even if everything else around you was a big hologram or a simulation, you would still know that you exist as a mind, if nothing else, because you are thinking in the first place. So the method of doubt lets you doubt everything except your mind. Now, since you know you have a mind, it has ideas. One of the ideas in the mind is the idea of God. And he says this idea is special, it's unique. Why? Because it's the idea of an infinite being. Since it's the idea of an infinite being, he says it has to be caused by something which is at least infinite. So that means there actually has to be an infinite being to cause your idea of it, and that means God exists. God caused you to have the idea of God. Nothing else could have, because a finite thing could not have led to an infinite idea. So since God exists, he thinks he's now proven. What do we know about God? That he's perfect, including being infinitely good. So since God is known to be infinitely good, that means that when you have clear and distinct perceptions, they're guaranteed to be true. And one of the clear and distinct perceptions is that if two things could be clearly imagined or conceived of as existing separately, then they really are two separate things. As an example, I think I mentioned me and this watch. Although it is on my wrist, it's easy to imagine me and the watch not being together. And that means that me and the watch are not the same thing, but two separate things, even if it is on my wrist for now. So along the same lines, he says, well, it is clearly conceivable that the mind can exist without the body. Like you can clearly imagine your mind existing with no body at all. And so since that's clearly imaginable, the two things really must be able to exist separately, and therefore the mind and the body are two different things. So that's his argument for dualism. Based on conceivability, essentially, backed by the guarantee that God guarantees that clear and distinct things are true. So since God is real and he's good, whatever's clear and distinct has to be true. And Descartes sees that it's clear and distinct to be able to judge that if two things could be separated in the mind, then they would really exist separately. And the last step is just saying that the mind and the body can be imagined clearly to exist separately. After that, the only last leftover pieces of his paper were well, it's also clear and distinct that the external world exists, and he gave a couple reasons for that. For one, you can't just dream up whatever you want to perceive and then start seeing it. That shows that the external world has an objective quality to it. So it's not just that you can randomly, subjectively cause yourself to start seeing something. Like if I tell you to right now perceive a little poodle right here, you can't. Even if you can imagine one in your mind, you can't perceive one in the environment. So that makes it seem like the environment's not created by the mind, or that it's not a dream. Also, you can't perceive only the things that you would want to perceive. You can't just control the world so that it's all favorable to your interests. And memories are less vivid than original perceptions, which makes it seem that the original perceptions were caused by objects that you perceived, and the memories you have later are representations of them without the perception of the object anymore. And then the other last clear and distinct perception, he says, is that you have a body. And he says that is clear because, first of all, you can control only the one body you have with your mind. So like if I'm doing stuff here with my hand, it's because my mind can control this hand, but it can't control any other person's body, just with thoughts anyway. And also, I experience sensations in this body when some stimuli is applied to it, but not to others. So like if heat or ice or something is applied to my body, then I will feel the stimuli. But of course, if it's done to another person, I don't feel it on their behalf, which again shows that it's clear that this body seems to be specially connected to me and my mind. And then the other thing is that you can't somehow like depart from your body and go to another place while the body stays behind, which again makes it appear clear that that body is yours, since if it was any other object out there, you could create distance between yourself and it, apart from the case of God being able to separate your mind and the body after life is over. Okay, so really that was everything from Descartes. It's a big argument for dualism. I don't know if I mentioned also one other thing he says, but I could just really quickly say it now. He says earlier when I claimed that maybe everything's a dream, so how do you know you're really even having a real experience right now? At the very end of his book, he says, just kidding, it's not a dream, and here's why. Because when you're having dreams, they don't connect to each other. It's not like episodes in a Netflix series where you go to sleep and you're like, I can't wait for the next installment to see what happens. The dreams are kind of disconnected, and there's no kind of narrative that ties them all together. But waking experiences are connected by memory. So like right now you're awake and you can tell because don't you remember we had a lecture last Wednesday and we had one before that the previous Monday, and so your waking experiences are all connected in a sort of sequence and in a storyline. But dreams are just random and episodic. One thing happens in a dream, next night you have another dream, it's some totally disconnected from that. So here's yet another reason to now have trust and confidence that there's an external world, you have a body, and you're not just dreaming everything. Okay, so we now can move to the other side of the debate. That's just my typical opening review. The other side, as we said, is physicalism. That's the idea that there's only one substance that makes everything, and it's just matter. And even the mind and everything that you can think or perceive or experience mentally is just a physical process of the brain. So to get into this new side of the argument, we're looking at the work of this philosopher, Daniel Stoljar. Now, I don't exactly know when he was born because he's still pretty young, he's still alive, but he's an Australian philosopher, and this paper he wrote was in 2005, and it's just called Physicalism. Okay, so here's the current author and essay for the moment. Daniel Stoljar, Physicalism, 2005. So his basic goal here in the paper is to define for the reader what is physicalism, and then having explained what it is, he wants to try and make the argument that it's really true. So he is a physicalist, he's a monist, and he's trying to make the case that this is the right perspective on reality, that this is a universe that's only made out of matter. And even the mind, as interesting as it is just another physical object producing the phenomenon of consciousness, but it's a physical process. Okay, so physicalism. His opening move is to try and give a very plain-spoken definition of physicalism, and here's the way he defines it. He says, you want to know what physicalism is? It's basically this idea. Physicalism says that, okay, I have to spell it correctly, thank you. Physicalism means everything is physical. Everything is physical. That's physicalism for you. So it's a statement about what everything in the universe is made out of. According to this view, everything's physical. Everything's made out of matter. Now, including consciousness, of course. So it says that the nature of this universe is that it's a physical universe, and everything happening and everything inside of it, it's all physical. Even me, even you, even things that don't immediately appear to be physical, they really are. And he says, if you think about it, according to physicalism, everything, every field of study is more or less an indirect branch of physics, even things that don't immediately seem to have anything to do with physics. Suppose, for example, that someone's out there studying history, and they're like, yeah, I chose history, and it has nothing to do with physics. That sounds like a really difficult topic, but I study history, right? And the person thinks, in no way does my subject of study have anything to do with physics. But according to a physicalist, what is history? History is really just the playing out of atoms aggregated together to form objects and events on the planet Earth, including events that involve human life forms and our species. And these life forms on the surface of the Earth doing whatever they do physically and biologically. We call those things like the French Revolution or the American Revolution or whatever. But any historical event, period of time, set of people, or actions, they're really all just, in the biggest possible picture, the playing out of matter in the void of space. Okay, so life forms living and doing things on the planet Earth are just physical objects operating according to the laws of physics. So whether it's poetry, history, music, dance, literature, things that you don't necessarily associate with physics, the author's claim is that if you look at the really big picture, it's all physics because it's all based on the operation of matter in space. Now, there have been other versions of monism in history. Today, in the modern day, physicalism is like the predominant version of monism. But if you go way, way back into like ancient history, there were some interesting different monist views back then. Let me just give you one as a point of comparison, contrast. There's this man named Thales that was an ancient Greek. He's like a pre-Socratic Greek, so he's so far back in the past that he's even before Socrates, who we learned a little bit about. But Thales believed this. He believed everything in the universe is made out of only one substance. But what was the substance that he thought made everything? According to Thales, everything's made out of water. So can you imagine that? I mean, today that almost sounds, it does sound kind of silly, right? Because we know so much more about the constitution of the universe and what is made, what the elements are, what the different chemicals and substances are. But in his view, everything's made of water. Now, keep in mind, this is like 2,500 years ago. So even though today we might laugh at that idea, back then it was taken seriously. Why? Well, they noticed, like Thales noticed, that water can take different forms. Like it can be solid if it's frozen, turning into ice, back into a liquid, or it can even become a vapor. So looking at the fact that it can transmute into these different forms, and then like if you breathe on your hand, like moisture, condensation collects on your hand. So Thales believed everything are just various states of water. Everything you're looking at around you is just water in different forms. Anyway, that's clearly just been set aside into the dustbin of history. We're not dealing with Thales anymore, but we still have monism, and monism today says that everything's made not out of water, but out of atoms, out of physical atomic particles that can be put together to form larger aggregate shapes and objects. Okay, so he points out that some people label physicalism as the word materialism. That's a synonym that sometimes is used for physicalism, but I do prefer this terminology to the word materialism, because materialism also has connotations with a different meaning that has nothing to do with science or philosophy. Like you've maybe heard people call someone a materialistic person if they're only obsessed with the way they look or physical possessions or superficial things, right? Too materialistic. But materialism in the scientific and philosophical sense just means physicalism. Everything's made out of matter. So the philosophical and scientific sense of the word has nothing to do with the informal usage of the word. I prefer the word physicalism, therefore, because it avoids those false associations, because there's no other real interpretation of this word except everything's made out of matter. Okay, so to get into physicalism in greater depth, the author says we have to pursue answers to two major questions. So there's these two big questions about physicalism, and he says grappling with those, getting answers to those will give us a clear sense of both what physicalism is and why some people believe it's true. So I'm going to put that next. Two main questions about physicalism, according to the author here. Okay, so one, he labels it the interpretation question. And then the other one he calls the truth question. Okay, so let me go ahead and provide the statement of each of the two questions, and we'll talk about those. The first one, the interpretation question. So this question is basically just asking this. It's asking, what does it mean to say that everything is physical, right? Physicalism says everything's physical. This question asks, what does that statement mean? What does it mean to say that everything is physical? Okay, so what does it mean to say this, that everything is physical? The question is about how to interpret the meaning of that statement, that everything is physical. What does that mean? How do we interpret that? So that's the interpretation question. Now, separate but related to that is the truth question. And what the truth question asks is simply, is it true that everything is physical? So one thing we could ask is, what does this even mean? Beyond that, we can ask, is it true? So here we go. Is it true, though? Is it true that everything is physical? Separately from what that would mean, is it true? Okay, now, you can see the two questions here on the board. Stoljar, the author, says that for you to really answer one of these, you have to deal with the other one first. So he actually says there's a kind of order, logically, that you can't really answer one of them until the other one is first answered. Now, let me ask you, according to your common sense judgment, which of these two do you think you would have to tackle first before you could really move on to the other one? Like to move on to the other one, you would have to answer the other one first. So which one do you think would have to go first in the order of approaching these two questions? Shall we deal with the interpretation question first? What does it mean to say that everything is physical? Or talk about whether it's true that everything is physical? Which one do you think you would have to have an answer for before you could evaluate the other one? So which one's first? That's right, Tina, very good, you're right. You have to answer the interpretation question first, and let me try to make that a little bit reasonable to you if it was not already. You cannot assess whether a claim is true if you do not know what it means, right? So if I tell you right now, watch out, because all throughout Fullerton right now, I've heard reports that there are jargles all throughout the city. Now, can you tell me whether that's a true or false statement? No, because you don't even know what it means. It's a made-up word, but like, let's suppose there was some technical term that you did not understand. You could not make an evaluation of whether or not this is a true or false claim if you don't know what to look for, if you don't know what the claim is even saying. So we would have to find out what the meaning of my statement was before you could perform any investigation as to whether or not it was true or false. So in the same sense here, we will not be able to determine whether this is a true statement or not if we do not know what it means. So we've got to first get a clear sense of what it means to even say that everything is physical. Okay, so let's try and get on to the interpretation question. And once we, wrestle with that and try to give an answer, then we'll move to the next one. And that's the way the author works in this paper. So what does it mean to say that everything's physical? Let's try and get into it. Okay. So to answer that interpretation question, again, to answer the question what it means to say that everything is physical, the best way of trying to address that is through the concept of what is called supervenience. Okay, so this is a major, perhaps the major concept in Daniel Stoljar's paper. It would also be important for anybody who chose to write on the topic of the philosophy of mind, because supervenience is specifically mentioned in the prompt. So anyway, as we try to get an answer to what it means to say that everything is physical, we look to the notion of supervenience. Okay, so here's the word, S-U-P-E-R, super, and then venience is V-E-N-I-E-N-C-E. Now that's a word that often pops up as a spelling error in like spelling check on a word processor, because it's like such a technical term of art for philosophy and science that it doesn't even appear in a lot of dictionaries. So just to make sure that we don't have any confusion about the spelling, I'm going to type it also here in the chat. Supervenience is the word. So supervenience has to do with the relationship between little parts that make up a whole structure. And we say of that type of relation that the large-scale structure supervenes on the parts that build it up, that make it. Let me give an explanation which has to do with a clear example. So the example that is used to fully explain this is what's called a dot matrix picture, okay? So dot matrix picture example. Sorry, thanks. Dot matrix picture. Okay, so it's so it takes a moment for me to explain what a dot matrix picture is, because I'm dealing with a lot of people today that don't necessarily look at printed images as much as we used to. Like I'm talking about, like if you had a printed image, like a photo, like this is another one of my textbooks in a different class. But you see how there's like a photo, obviously, like on the front of the textbook, on the front flap of the page. Think about printed materials like that. So on like physical paper, when an image is shown on it, like a photograph. Another example could be images shown on the cover of the newspaper. So you got like a President Biden signing a bill in the Oval Office, and the photo on the cover of the newspaper is duplicated on every copy of the newspaper. So look, if you have one of these physical printed images, whether it's a comic book, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a magazine or whatever, if you zoom in really close, like if you magnify and you look at what that image is under magnification, if it's a dot matrix image, then what you would see is this, that even though the picture, as you step back and look at the whole thing, is just an image, when you zoom in really close, you see a bunch of little dots, of colored ink. And these dots are displayed in a given pattern and order, and being displayed in that order is what we see as the big, large-scale image. Okay, so I just want you to think of in your mind a big picture that's made out of a bunch of little dots of ink. This is actually exactly how we duplicate, printed materials that have a photo image. So like we have a coordinate set, a grid, against which dots can be assigned positions. And once we map out an assigned array of dots to fill the spaces on that grid with given colors, then we can stamp that down. That creates the picture on the page, and then we can just do the same for every new piece of paper that slides through where we have to imprint this image upon it. Okay, so that's the way it happens. It's not by magic, obviously. We replicate the image on a page by adding the overlay of ink dots. Yes, now David, I'm happy that you made this point and added that comment, because I was just about to say this. Since it's a little difficult in a way to speak across the generational divide, when nowadays, as you guys know, if you're looking at images, anything that's a pictured image, you're often not looking at a physical piece of paper anymore. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. I guess it's saving some paper. But what you're often looking at are things like this right here, your digital screen or your mobile device or your television even. And what would be the corollary of the little dots of ink when we're talking about a digital screen or monitor? In that case, they're not ink dots, but you got it right, David. They're little pixels. Okay, so I can also give you the same explanation using the more updated modern example of a pixelated image on a digital viewing device. Okay, so say that you're looking at a meme or whatever, or even just right now. I mean, this is an example, but it's a video rather than a still image. So let's go with the still image. You're looking at some kind of classic meme that's circulating around on Twitter, and everyone's looking at the same meme on their device, on their computer, wherever they are. How is it that that same image can appear on the different devices? Okay, well, have you ever looked close up at the back screen of your digital monitor, cell phone, or computer? What you will see is that it's a grid of pixels. Now, what is an individual pixel? A pixel is a little tricolor panel which can be illuminated in a certain way. And when you're trying to deliver instructions to a computer or television or whatever to project an image, this can be done digitally by instructing the device to illuminate the back panel of pixels in a particular order. So when all the pixels are given that digital instruction to display the image, each pixel on the resolution of the device giving its contribution to the big image forms whatever we see when we look at it, right? Even right now, I know I said this is not a still image, so it's a bit of an awkward example, but the fact that you can look at my face is because the pixels on the resolution of your device are given instructions through the medium of the application that we're using to project onto the screen my face by using the same kind of digital instructions that we're talking about. So that's how we can replicate either digital images or printed images by assigning either pixels or dots of ink to a standard grid. Okay, so if you want another possible analogy to the same, have you ever looked at artwork that's done in the style of mosaic? Okay, so that's like a big artwork. It could be like a depiction of Jesus or something, you know, from the Renaissance period, or Mother Mary, whoever, some religious figure. But when you look at it very close up, what you're going to see are a bunch of little tiles of various colors. And these tiles individually are just tiles, but when they're put together in that combination, they form a larger image. Okay, so whether it's pointillist or mosaic art, the contemporary example of a dot matrix image or a digitized image shown via pixels, I want you to hold that essential concept in your mind of a big picture, but it's made out of a bunch of little either fill in the blank bits of whatever kind, whether the bits are ink dots or pixels. Okay, so to kind of further reinforce the lesson and give you a visual to contemplate, I'll try to draw a very, very crude example here of, like, let's say this is a dot matrix picture. Now, I'm going to try and make it look as though it's made out of dots, but this is a pretty blunt instrument, this Expo marker, so plus I'm not the greatest artist anyway, but forgive me as I try. Okay, so here I'm displaying a dot matrix picture. Okay, now, not too bad actually for me, but you'll actually let me know. You're probably the better judge. What do you think it is that's depicted in this image? We're pretending this is a full dot matrix picture. So that's our example. But what do you think it shows? What's the picture of? Hopefully it's not too bad, so you're like, I have no idea. But maybe you've got an idea. What is that? What's that image? Nobody knows? Ooh, I thought I did better. Well, okay, Tina, you say mountains. I can understand why you think that, because these look kind of like little peaks. But actually, I was going more in the direction of what David and Anthony are saying. So let's all just agree, as ambiguous as I suppose it may look. I was just trying to draw like the ocean waves. Nice day at the beach, you know, sun is shining down. What are these? I guess birds, bats, something. They're flying, and they're flying over the ocean waves. Okay, so ocean scene. Here's the sun. These are the waves. Those are the birds. Now, notice this. Since this is a dot matrix image, okay, all the things that are in the image are really just assembled by the little dots, right? And the author Stoljar introduces a little terminology right here. So let me make sure this is clear. He brings in the term global feature. Global feature. So what is that? Let me tell you. So a global feature is simply a big picture aspect of the matrix. So it's something that is formed by the little individual dots. Not one of the dots, but something that is created by the dots when they combine together and aggregate. So this is, we could say it's like a big picture aspect of the composite. A big picture, in quotes, aspect of the composite. This is a composite because it's composed out of all the little dots. So that's what I wrote. Global feature, a big picture aspect of the composite. So let me make sure that you're tracking this. Given this definition here, let's apply it to that example. Can you tell me what is one global feature of this dot matrix picture here? So there's a couple of possible options to point to. But for example, what is one of the global features of the dot matrix image that I've put on the board? So you're trying to tell me right now of something that is a big picture aspect of the composite. So what is one of those things? A thing, in other words, that's made out of little dots, but it's, you know, it's a macroscopic thing that's formed out of the microscopic dots. So don't say a dot, but say something that's made by the dots in the picture. So for example, what could one of those things be? Just wait on your answer, and then I can say more. So in the picture, there's different global features. What's one of them? Okay, good. Thank you, David. So one is the birds, right? So here are these birds floating, flying above the water. What they are an image generated by the aggregation of the little dots of ink. Can someone tell me another one of the global features of the picture? Just making sure that this is clear. So very good, David. Birds, that's one. Another option could have been to point out what? The sun. Thanks, Anthony. Correct. Or you could have said the waves. Sure. So those things, those features of the composite are global features. We call them global features because they are the result of the little infinitesimal bit pieces arranging together to form something larger than themselves. Okay, so now let's all be clear and agree that in this picture, all the global features are nothing other than the pattern and the arrangement of the dots in the grid. The way that we would then use the term supervenience as a verb would be to say that the global features of the dot matrix image supervene on the pattern of dots, the pattern and distribution of dots. So when you have like a big picture structure that's made out of a bunch of little pieces put together in a given order, then we will say that the large structure supervenes on the pattern and distribution of the particles that make it up. Okay? Now that is as explained according to this example of a dot matrix picture. But what the author Stoljar wants us to do next is to transfer this entire example over as an analogy to the physical universe. Okay, so now we're going to do a little mental gymnastics, guys. I want you to think about how this universe, the real world, not just digital images or pictures that we print, but the physical universe all around us is kind of like a dot matrix. Because, similar to the dot matrix, we're living in a world that's got all kinds of stuff in it. But the stuff, the objects, the events, they are also made out of tiny little bits. But in physical space, what is a counterpart of the dots or the pixels? Like in this reality around you, we could say that there's these tiny little things that also make it all up. But now we are no longer talking about ink dots or pixels. What would be the physical comparative to those things in actual reality? The little bits that make it all up, that make all the big things up. What are these tiny little pieces that the universe is made out of, according to physicalism? That's right, David, atoms, right? Atoms, physical particles, elementary particles of matter. So, look, if we have two dot matrix pictures, okay, which have got the same exact pattern of dots, the same dot for dot arrangement, I have a question, okay? So say that I create a second dot matrix side by side with this one. And say that the second one, like I'll label this one A, and then over here, suppose that I created B, and B was a dot for dot replica of A. Okay, following me? So you got that idea? It's if I had a second one that was a complete copy of A. So like everywhere there's a dot in A, there's the same kind of exact pattern over here with B. So tell me then, if that's the case, if B is a dot for dot copy of A, then what will B be like in comparison to A? Can you tell me that? So A, we see it, it's on the board. I haven't drawn B, but I'm just asking you to think of a hypothetical where I would draw B and it would be a dot for dot copy of A. What would B look like then by comparison to A if it was a dot replica of A? How would it look in comparison to A? That's right, David, it would be the same. Okay, I don't want you to overthink that too much. So it would be a carbon copy. If I had a dot for dot copy, it would be a duplicate of A. So would it have all the same global features? Yes, it would. Would it still have the birds? Correct. Would it still have the sun? Yes. Waves? Also yes. Why would it have all the same global features? Because if you're following the discussion, the global features just are the arrangement of dots on the grid. So here's a principle that the author says we can just agree with. If you have two dot matrices, which are identical in terms of the arrangement of parts, then they're also going to be identical in all their global features. So same dots, same larger scale features too, same global features. Now, can you finish this thought? Suppose that we had two dot matrices which had different global features. Okay, so say that I created dot matrix B and it was very similar to A, except one of the birds was absent, or there was an extra bird. If there's any global features that are different with B in comparison to A, then because the global features are different, the two matrices also have to differ in what other way? Okay, so you get different global features, therefore they must be different in terms of what? So same dots, same global features, different global features in two matrices. That has to mean that they have different what? What can we deduce from the fact that there's different global features in two dot matrices? If there's different global features, then obviously they also must differ in what sense? So you were quick to, okay, good, different dot distribution, exactly. So if the dots and the distribution of them is exactly identical, then we're just going to get the same image duplicated with all the same global features. If you have a different set of global features in a compared image, then they must not have the same pattern of dots, because if they did, again, they would be exactly alike in all those ways. So now, as I was saying a moment ago, let's transfer this over to the physical universe. So we say this physical universe is a big system with all kinds of objects and events and things in it. And we could call those things in the universe global features, okay, using the same terminology as applied here to the matrix of dots. So can anybody tell me what's one global feature of real reality? There's lots of options. Just think about the world and everything in it, and just tell me at least one thing in this world that's, based on this definition, a global feature of it. So something that's made out of atoms, but it's not an individual atom. It's a thing that is like an object or an event that is a bunch of these atoms pieced together in a certain way. So what could be like an example of a global feature of the universe? You don't have to overthink it much. It's everything really, but just you'll give me an example. Okay, the Earth. Good, Anthony. The Earth is an object in this universe, and according to physicalism, what is it? It's a bunch of atoms, but see the Earth as the large-scale aspect. Are you a global feature of this universe, according to physicalism and according to this description of things? Would that be fair to say that you, the student, are also a global feature of reality? Let me know. Yes, correct. Why? Because if physicalism is true, like let's just play along for a minute, then you are also just a thing in this universe that's made out of a bunch of little atoms. You're different from this whiteboard or this desk or this marker, but one thing we have in common is that, yeah, we're actually all just made out of atoms, just in different order and different distribution and combination. So physicalism then is going to hit you with this idea. If we had, it's a little bit of a mental leap, but try to follow. Suppose that we had a second physical universe. I know there doesn't necessarily have to be one, but suppose for the just sake of the description of this argument that there was a second physical universe. And I want you to now consider this. Suppose that that second universe was an atomic duplicate of ours, okay? So I told you before, compare two dot matrices, which are dot for dot duplicates. Now we're looking at a bigger picture. Here's this physical universe. Suppose that we had a second universe, which was atom for atom, a perfect replica of ours. So in terms of the distribution and order and combination of atoms in universe B, let's say ours is universe A, universe B is down to the last detail atomically copied. So can you tell me, what would universe B like? What would universe B be like if it was this atomic duplicate of A? According to physicalism, what should we expect of this physical copy of A? That it would be like what? So we're transporting this thinking of comparing two over to physical reality. Yes, then it would be identical to our own. That's right. And so it would have to have all the same global features as our universe has. So if that was the case, walking down this little rabbit hole, right? If there was a second universe which was a physical atomic copy of our own, then would Biden be the president right now in that universe? Can you tell me that? Just throwing out a couple of random facts. So, as we know, Biden is the president of the United States. Would he be the president of the United States in this duplicate universe? Yes. Why? Because everything that happens in this universe is based on the distribution and order of atoms. And so if that's true, then if you have a second universe which is atomically identical, then there could not be any difference of events. So in that second universe, which is a physical copy, it would not just be physically identical, it would be identical in every possible way, historically, socially, and even psychologically. In this duplicated universe, would JFK still have been assassinated back in '63 or whatever? Yes, because that event happening in this universe is just the playing out of all the atoms combined in the way that they are according to the laws of nature. So there could not be any differences in global features if both universes were to have the same physical facts. And that, according to physicalism, is what it means to say that everything is physical, even including mind and thought. What it means is that everything supervenes on atoms, even our thoughts and our mental experiences and internal introspection. So dualists think that the mind is separate from the body and brain, and that the mind is somehow free to think of whatever, even if the brain was in a given configuration. What physicalism is telling you is that if there were a second universe which was atomically identical to ours, then there would even be a copy of you watching this lecture in that duplicated universe, and that same copy of you would be having the exact same thoughts that you're having now. So what this denies is that you could possibly have difference of psychological states if the physical facts were all the same. Dualists seem to think that if we had two universes where your brain was in the exact same state, you could be thinking something else over there because your mind is not necessarily completely identical to the brain. But if the mind and the brain are no different and it's really just the brain that is responsible for all of your states of consciousness, then by hypothesis, if we had a physical replica of you, then the conscious states would be the same as well. Okay, so the rule holds, he thinks, in physical reality as well. You had two universes which were atomically identical, then they would be identical in all other ways. And if you could compare a universe to ours and there were different global features in it, like a copy of our universe, but somehow you passed away before you ever got to attend Cal State Fullerton, your counterpart over there, then they would not have the same physical facts, because having the same atomic facts would lead to the same macroscopic facts. So a difference in those would mean a difference in the distribution of atoms as well. This leads to his formal definition then of physicalism, and you'll see him write this on page 580 of the book. So I'll put it here. It's a little bit of a technical sounding definition or explanation, but I'll bring it down to earth as I always try to do. So he says, here's physicalism, the essential definition of it. Physicalism is true at a possible world W just in case, okay, so just in case the following. Just in case any world which is a atomic duplicate of W an atomic physical duplicate of W is a duplicate of W in all respects. Okay, so physicalism is true in our universe. That's the reference to possible world W. Physicalism is true in this universe just in case any other universe which was atomically copied from ours would be a duplicate of our universe in every single way. So that's what it means if physicalism is true here. It means that if there were a second universe which was physically identical to ours, then it would be the same in all possible ways. It would be the same socially, psychologically, historically, and everything else. So if we keep the physical facts in two closed physical systems identical, then they could not have any differences at all. So everything that's happening here is therefore just physical. Everything is physical because everything depends on the position, placement, and combination of atoms that form all things in space and time. This means that consciousness itself is simply something that's caught up in this big matrix of atoms, and there's nothing to it other than the pattern and order of atoms that build it. So if we did have another closed physical system, I repeat, where the atomic facts were identical to our own, then all the facts would be just as identical to our own here as well. Let me read from the book and you can see his way of putting it. He says, a dot matrix has global properties, and yet all there is to the picture is dots and non-dots at each point of the matrix. The global properties are nothing but patterns in the dots. They supervene. No two pictures could differ in their global features without differing somewhere in whether there is or is not a dot. And he says, this example gives us one way to introduce the basic idea of physicalism. The basic idea is that the physical features of the world, like pattern of atoms, are like the dots in the picture. And the psychological or biological or social features of the world are like the global properties of the picture. Just as the global features of the picture are nothing but a pattern in the dots, so too the psychological, biological, and social features of the world are nothing but a pattern in the physical atoms of the world. Just as the global features of the picture supervene on the dots, so too everything supervenes on the distribution of atoms, if physicalism is true. Okay, and so he says, physicalism is true at a possible world W, just in case any world which is a physical duplicate of W is a duplicate of W simpliciter, which means in every respect. So that's what it means to say that everything is physical. What it means is that if physicalism is true, there's no possible world which could be a physical copy of ours, but somehow different in some psychological or social or biological or historical way. Okay, so again, the atoms govern everything, even your thoughts, right down to the last detail. And you may think there's something unique, special, non-physical about your consciousness, but what's being claimed here is that if we had like the ability to crank out another universe, like if God did that and he made it physically identical to ours, then you'd have the same kind of counterpart that would have the same experiences, concepts, thoughts, and psychological in life that you are having. So that means that it's nothing other than something built out of atoms, and it could be rebuilt, at least in theory, if a second universe existed with the same pattern there. Now, this is an essential claim to physicalism, the idea of supervenience. So it's really something that's like a core commitment of all physicalists. That's why he says of it that it's like a minimal assumption of physicalism, that everything, mental states and all, just depend on the pattern of atoms. So having now, he thinks, explained what it means to say that everything is physical, that everything supervenes on atoms, now he's ready to try and tackle the second question that we mentioned at the beginning, which is it true, though, that everything is physical? So the truth question. He does, of course, Stoljar, believe that physicalism is true, so he supports, yes, it's true. And he tries to give two different arguments to persuade the reader that it's true. I'll talk to you about those two arguments now. The first one's a little more complex than the second, but I also think it's more interesting than the second one is. So anyway, here's the first one. And what we're doing right now is explaining why he thinks physicalism is true, and he's giving an argument why it's true. So he calls the first argument the argument from causal closure. And I want to make sure that we pause for a moment to recognize the word is causal, not casual. It's a different spelling. This is a common spelling error that I see sometimes in student work, but I'm trying to warn you off of that. So the word is causal, C-A-U-S-A-L. Casual has a different spelling, C-A-S-U-A-L, and they don't mean the same thing. Casual is like, dressing informally to the office or something on casual day. But causal has to do with cause and effect. So the two words don't have anything to do with each other, even though there's very similar spelling. So here it is, the argument from causal closure, causal, not casual. Okay, so this argument, like many in logic and philosophy, has a couple different premises that eventually lead us to the conclusion. And so I'm numbering the premises 1, 2, and 3, and then the conclusion is at the bottom below them. Premises are reasons that are given to support a conclusion. So that's how arguments work. The first premise of this argument says this: simply, every event which has a cause has a physical cause. Okay, so every event which even has a cause has a physical cause. That statement is saying that because we live in a physical universe, if something happens, then something physical caused it to happen. And there seem to be no exceptions to that. If a tree branch falls onto the hood of your car, wherever you had parked it, that's something that happened, but it's caused by physical factors, by the gradual weakening of the branch of the tree, perhaps by a sudden gust of wind that caused it to finally detach from the remaining part of the tree, and then its weight and angle of trajectory as it falls, plus wind factors, etc., cause it to descend upon the surface of your car, and that massive impact causes the damage or dent to the hood. That's just one example, completely made up, but it generalizes across the board. Any event that you like to mention would have to have a physical cause, or else it wouldn't have happened if nothing physically happened to cause it to happen. So there you go. Every event that has a cause has a physical cause, premise one. Premise two continues by saying mental events can cause physical events. Okay, so let me write this. Mental events can cause physical events. Mental events can cause physical events. Now, what that's saying is actually something I think that's pretty straightforward in a way. All it's saying is that thought, like thinking of something, can lead to an action that your body does. Okay, and that's just what it is to be a living thing. Like even right now as I'm talking to you, why are these words coming out of this person? Why is this sound coming out of this person? Well, because I'm thinking. I have a job to do. I have a lecture to deliver to my students, and here's the content that they need. So I'm going to make myself deliver it to you. If I ask you to type an answer to a question in this chat, and you type something, once the comment appears, I can see that you've typed, so that's something that happened. And why did it get typed? Well, because you had a decision in the mind. I'm going to write the answer out and put it into the chat. So the typing of your fingers, the actual hitting of the keys is a physical event, but it starts with your mind thinking, let me try and contribute. And like even just here, right? I'm going to snap my finger. Okay, so that happened. That was physical. You saw it happen. You heard it happen. Why did it happen? Well, because I thought in my mind, let me snap my fingers to illustrate this point, that by thinking, I can make it happen, okay? So I don't know if that's anything too trippy or weird. I mean, usually you're just doing things and you're not thinking about the relationship between the thought and the behavior. But right now we're just trying to make that explicit. So mental, like thoughts, choices, decisions, can of course cause the behavior that we see you do. Ask yourself, why was JFK, why did he die? Okay, let's take it step by step. Well, he died because of a gunshot, sure. The impact of the bullet in his brain, that killed him. But why did the brain get hit by the bullet? Well, because the bullet was ejected from the firing mechanism of a firearm. Well, what caused that? Well, the cause of the bullet being ejected was pressure applied to the trigger mechanism. And why did the pressure get applied? What was the cause of that? Well, you could say muscles in the hand of the shooter contracted around the trigger, squeezing on it and therefore causing it to fire. But why did the muscles in the hand contract? Well, because nerve signals were sent from the brain to the hand to cause it to contract. But why did those nerve signals get sent? Because the assassin wanted, right, had thought and intended to kill the president. And so the thought leads to this outcome. And we can take it all the way back to the original thought that led to that. Even right now, why are you a student in this class? I mean, that's something happening, but it happened because of thoughts that you had and actions that followed from them. So whatever the example is, whether it's big, small, something like world historical, or just an everyday thing like me clapping my hands, thought can and does lead to physical action every day, all the time. Okay? Hopefully that made some sense. So now we get to the third premise. The third premise is key. And it's the one that is, I think, a little bit tricky to at first understand because it's complicated wording. But again, I'll try to make it clear. So the third premise just says that if an event A, if an event A causes an event B, basically it says that's the only cause. There's not anything else separate from A that also caused B. But let me put it here and then I'll explain more. So if an event A causes an event B, then in that case, there is no other event C which is different from A and which also causes B. Okay, so I'm I know it's a little scrunched at the bottom, but I'll read it again and explain as necessary. What it says is, if an event A causes an event B, then that means that there is no other event C which is different from A and which also causes B. So I know that sounds a little bit wordy and complex, but I bet you, me and you can figure out the easy way to put this. Let's try it. All it's saying really is this, that for every effect, there's how many causes? Can you tell me the number? This says that whenever something happens, there's exactly this number of causes, not more and not less. So every effect has exactly how many causes according to premise 3. And reading it from front to back again, it says if A causes B, that's it. There's nothing else like C that also causes B. So in other words, for every effect, there's how many causes? Yes, exactly, Alicia, just one. One and not more than one. So it's basically saying that there cannot be 2 causes for the same effect, just one. Of course, there cannot be 0 causes. That would be like nothing caused it. But there also, he says, cannot be more than one. So there's a single cause for each effect. If we put these 3 premises together, what they imply, conclusion at bottom, is that mental events just are physical events. I'm going to write it kind of small, but I'll write it in the chat too. Therefore, mental events are physical events. So that's the conclusion at bottom, and I know it's a little small, so I will put it here in the chat. I'll label it as conclusion. Mental events are physical events. Now let me explain how that conclusion does follow from the 3 premises here. Okay, guys. So look, from premise 1, the claim is that every event that has any cause has a physical cause. So there's at least one physical cause of any event. The second premise says your mind, as we said, can cause your behavior, right? Thinking leads to action. But since every event which has a cause has a physical cause, and your mind causes physical events, that means this mind that is causing the physical events is itself a physical cause. It's the brain. The brain is the thing causing your actions. When you think of something, it's the brain thinking and then producing the behavior that we all observe or witness. So your mind can cause things to happen, but everything that has a cause has a physical one. What the third premise is saying now is that because we already know your brain is the physical cause of your behavior, then that's it. There's no other thing that's also a second separate cause of your behavior. What this is denying is that, oh, it's my brain, but also it's my soul or something completely separate from my brain that does not even depend on it that causes me to do these things. So it's only the physical cause. We know the brain is at least involved in producing your behavior. And what premise 3 is basically saying is that we exclude any other alternative causes aside from the brain. That would be adding more causes than are necessary, right? That would be like saying there's 2 causes for the same effect. The brain causes your actions, but also the soul or non-physical mind. Why would we add to the explanation an unnecessary second cause when it's already self-sufficient to just assert that the brain is the sole physical cause of your behavior? So as I see the argument and read it back, everything has a physical cause. Your mind can cause your actions, but that's just physical too. It's the brain. And don't think that the physical cause of your behavior, the brain, is sitting side by side with another thing that's not physical that causes it. It's just physical. To say more than that would be to violate the principle that every effect has a single cause. Okay, so your brain causes your behavior, and basically this says that's it. Nothing separate from the brain, nothing non-physical. The brain is enough by itself to explain why you're doing the things that you're doing and why you behave the way you do. So that means that mental events like choosing to do stuff is just physical activity. It's just the brain. And that means that if mental events are physical, then physicalism is true, because it's the only thing that anybody thinks is not physical is mental events. So if even you choosing, deciding, hoping, wishing, willing, if all of that is just brain activity that's governed by the laws of physics and neuroscience, then there's no room in the universe for anything that's not physical, because the only thing that was even a candidate for being non-physical were our subjective consciousnesses. And this is saying that's just brain activity. And do you really think that it's something separate from that? There's no way that there could be 2 causes for the same effect. At least that's what the argument says. Now, you might hear the argument and wonder, is it really true, though, that every effect just has a single cause? I mean, even look at you. You might say, well, I exist, but I was caused by two things, my mom and my dad. So doesn't that already violate the principle here? But, the person making this argument's pretty clever, and they would say, well, you call it two different causes, but it was the event of conception, the fertilization of the egg by the sperm, that was the one cause, the single cause of your birth. And even though we can refer to the two different progenitors of the gametes, there's still only one event that causes this. You could say, like a complicated event like World War I had like 20 different causes, but in a way that's speaking loosely. If you talk about the cause-effect relationship between specific events that led up to the war, then you could still say they only had one single causal basis. Okay? So like the assassination of Franz Joseph led to this action, and this other thing led to that other outcome. And so we'd be speaking in a way not precisely enough to say that there were multiple causes of that event. When you specify what the event is that's being caused, we can always narrow it down to one, or at least so goes the argument. Now, in my opinion, this is the stronger argument that the author does give to try and make the case that physicalism is true. But he does hit us with another one, very brief, after this. And so I'll try to just lay that one out there, and it won't take very long because it's very simple. So the second argument is simpler, more straightforward, less complicated, but I also argue that it's not as interesting and not as persuasive. But it's called the argument from methodological naturalism. Okay, so this one just says, there's two premises. It's a quick little argument. The first one says, it is reasonable to believe what is believed by the methods of natural science. Okay, it is reasonable to believe what is believed by the methods of natural science. Okay, and the second premise just continues by saying that physicalism is believed by the methods of natural science. So putting these two pieces together, what follows, I hope it's not too much of a leap to understand that it just says it's reasonable to believe basically whatever science does, and science believes physicalism. So therefore, it's reasonable to believe physicalism is true. Okay, so that's the whole argument. In a way, I'd say it's not as satisfying as the previous one, because let's look at it. First premise says it's at least reasonable to hold the beliefs that are believed by science and natural science. What that is saying is that, scientists are basically reasonable. The consensus views of the scientific community, if you hold them on your own, no one can say, oh, you're just insane, you're just wacky. I mean, you're coming up with weird, wild stuff. If you believe in the scientific consensus, that's not weird, wild, completely off base, because scientists have to generate experimentally verifiable confirmation for their theories and hypotheses. They can't just say, hey, I've got a wild guess, put it out there, and that's science. No, they have to say, well, it's actually been tested, and my hypothesis has been verified by the experimental design of the test. So scientists, whenever they issue any kind of views or consensus views, they're always based on a wealth of empirical evidence and data to back it up, and observations. So scientists, even if we don't always agree with the things they say, sometimes people will be like, oh, evolution doesn't sound nice because God, I wanted him to make it, just for us in his image. But even if you don't agree with some of the things the scientists say for religious or other reasons, you can't really claim, oh, that they're just these people are just wild, they're just making crazy stuff up. No, at a minimum, you have to kind of give it up that they're at least reasonable. Reasonable things could be false sometimes, but you can't say they're just coming up with weird, out of control ideas with no connection to reason or evidence. So anyway, long story short, if you follow the beliefs of the scientific community, you're going to kind of piggyback on their reasonableness too. No one will ever accuse someone of being unreasonable for following the scientific consensus. And then the second premise just continues by adding that, well, physicalism is believed, at least methodologically, by science. Science assumes physicalism within the practice. So if scientists assume and believe in physicalism, and it's reasonable to believe what scientists and science believes, then that's something reasonable to believe. It's reasonable to believe physicalism. Why? Because the scientific community does, and whatever they believe is reasonable for you to believe too, basically. But here's the reason that I say that I like the other argument better. I mean, this argument's a fair argument. It is true, premise one, that it's reasonable to believe what scientists do. And yes, this is also true, so I can see the logic. The only thing about it, though, that I find a little unsatisfying is it doesn't really tell you directly why these scientists think this. It kind of just outsources the intellectual labor to the community of scientists that we presume to be smart and reliable. Now, to be fair, that's to be expected in a way, because we kind of have to divide the intellectual labor among human beings, because we don't all have the time or the desire to become like leading physicists and scientists. So there are some people that are going to devote more of their time and life to that, and we defer to them because we just don't have the expertise or knowledge. So we just say, well, I'll follow whatever the scientific community says. But as much as we do that in our everyday lives, as philosophers, we'd probably prefer to be able to understand on our own why they're coming to these conclusions. So at least with the at least with the causal closure argument, they're telling you, here's why physicalism is perhaps true. Because there can't be more than one cause for each effect, right? And we know the brain causes your behavior, so wouldn't that be the only cause? That at least gives you something to think about and to contemplate. Whereas in this case, it says, hey, there's this black box of like scientific reasoning, you don't know what they're doing, but just follow their lead and you should be reasonable too. Not necessarily wrong or bad to do that, but as an intellectual, sometimes you'd like to think about the reasons on your own instead of to just defer the consideration of them to other people who have more time or energy. Now, David, who made this argument, this is all still Daniel Stoljar. So we're talking about the content from his paper, but the kind of arguments that he's reporting on here, they're not necessarily like his creation. He's reporting on them, and these are often arguments that not only he, but other people give that are followers and advocates of physicalism. So these are like physicalist arguments that are presented by Stoljar, but we wouldn't want to say he was the only person to ever come up with them. Does that make sense to you, David? So they're like arguments within the field of philosophy of science that try to give reasonable evidence and support for physicalism. And they're cited by Stoljar, and there's a kind of similar range of arguments that you'll find authors are offering in that field with slight tweaks and differences, but this is kind of the summary he gives. Very good. Thanks, David. So anyway, then, that's everything for today. I guess we've made it all the way through the Daniel Stoljar paper. So we're almost all the way on track with the dates in the calendar. We're going to try to catch up on Wednesday for the best of our ability. Anyway, I would like you to read the article by J.J.C. Smart for Wednesday. It's called Sensations and Brain Processes. And also, when you can, take a look at the article by Alan Turing called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And those are our last two pieces on philosophy of mind. We'll see if we can cover them both on Wednesday. If not, we'll just continue to catch up on Monday with the last part of Turing. Okay then, so I'll let you guys go. I'm going to go and get my window fixed on the car. I've got an appointment right now, so I'm heading straight out. But let me know that everything's good, and if so, we'll be in touch through email and everything else until Wednesday. So is that all right? Okay, thanks again, Diego. I appreciate it. Everyone else, we all on the same page? Okay, perfect. Great, guys. Have a good one then. And keep in mind, you have 2 weeks still to work on your paper, but you'll want to start thinking of your notes at some point. So anyway, have a great one, and I'll be in touch. Thanks again. Thanks, Nicholas. I'll see what I can do.